This webinar. My name is Carter Maddox. I'm with ExamSoft. I'm excited to host Ron Carriveau today. He is in the Office of Assessment at University of North Texas. A little bit of background info on Dr. Carriveau here. He earned his PhD in educational psychology from the University of Arizona. He has extensive experience in outcomes assessment and standards development as a consultant, test publisher, director at the school district and state department levels, and assessment development manager for a large test publisher. He's taught at the elementary, middle school, and university levels and held the position of associate professor in educational psychology. He's presented at national conferences and is currently the outcomes assessment and measurement specialist for the Center for Learning Enhancement, Assessment, and Redesign at the University of North Texas. He's co-author with Philip M. Turner of the Next Generation Course Redesign, and he believes that the most important goals of the educational process is to provide a learning environment that engages students in the processes of inquiry, learning, and critical thinking, helping students to build a knowledge base that supports those processes and providing clear and measurable learning outcomes and fair assessments to measure those outcomes. Just a couple notes before we officially begin this webinar and I hand it over to Dr. Carriveau. Could you all advance to the next slide, please? If you have any questions, and we will be doing a Q&A at the end of this webinar, you can type your questions into the box that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. It's the GoToWebinar control panel, and there should be a tab under there that says questions. Go ahead and type those in, and in the last 15-20 minutes or so of this presentation, we'll be sure that they get addressed. If you could advance to the very next slide, Dr. Carriveau. Thank you. Also wanted everybody to know about an upcoming webinar we have. It will air Wednesday, April 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern, so that's next Wednesday. This will be presented by Mr. Dan Thompson, who's the Instructional Design and Technology Specialist at Oklahoma State University Center for Health Sciences. And he's going to be talking about using low-stakes assessment and student evaluation tools, so things like quizzes, take-home assignments, homework, about how you can wrap all those sorts of items and artifacts into your assessment process at your program or institution. Okay, one more slide advance, and I think I am done. Yep, okay, without further ado, I'm handing this over to Dr. Carriveau so he can present his presentation using technology to help validate the attainment of learning outcomes. Take it away, Dr. Carriveau.
Okay, thank you, Carter. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining. I'm going to advance directly to the model that we use for our QEP program. And by the way, I need to mention that I'm also the QEP Assistant Director. And the model that we use is probably something that you're familiar with, but this is how we developed it. And it's been used now for almost 7 years, and we just finished our 5th-year accreditation report. We start out, of course, with student learning outcomes, and that's a pretty common definition. And we need to make sure that those outcomes are attached and directly associated with assessments that measure the degree to which students are going to be achieving those outcomes or have achieved them. And we need to be able to use those outcome attainment results to evaluate and improve student learning, and that's how our QEP stated it. And we also want to use them to evaluate and improve courses and programs, and that was another outcome stated in our QEP. So our program here under the QEP was called Next Generation Course Redesign, and the model that was used is the model that's in my book. It's connecting the dots, right, developing student learning outcomes and outcome-based assessments. And that name didn't get up here anywhere, but there's a slide with it on later. Right now in our Next Gen program, we have over 100 course sections that are following this model. with about 6,000 students participating. And in the 5th-year impact report that we completed last year, it passed right off. And Dr. Whelan, the president of SACS, did in a statement to Dr. Rawlings write that the model, should be brought to the attention of others as a possible model. And following that, our 5th-year report, as well as our full University SACS 5th-year report, was selected as exemplary by SACS. And just another note about the Connecting the Dots book, there are over 250 institutions that have ordered 1 or more books, some as high as 400 books. So the model is getting used. There's a great interest all across the country in outcome-based assessment. I was at an international conference recently, and that word outcomes was also used frequently. So this is what we were responding to for our accreditation agency. I understand, some of you, several probably different agencies are represented, but ours is SACS, and in the standard 3.3.1, it clearly states we have to identify outcomes, and we have to assess whether those outcomes are achieved and provide evidence of improvement based on the results. And in the previous 3.3.3.1, it specifically mentioned courses. Middle States has very similar, and most of the commissions do, that statements that we have to have clearly articulated statements, and we have to have some way to assess those. We have to also be able to use the results, and I like their last statement there, that provide sufficient convincing evidence that students are achieving key institutional and program learning outcomes. So with that background, we were able to address our QEP reports, and this is typically how most information is conveyed about student achievement. And it's not that there's anything wrong with it. It's good information to know. It can be used for different reasons, for different purposes. But SACS and other accreditation agencies don't want attainment measures to be grades or percentage of grades. They don't want the grades because they don't address directly the SLOs or tell where improvement is needed in terms of those outcome statements. So what I'm offering today is the method we use to achieve that goal of reporting outcome attainment without the use of grades. So what we need in order to do that is a measure that makes that direct connection between test results and outcome statements, and specifically between test items and specific outcome statements. So this is what the model looks like. It's 3 levels. The goal statement, and we see many goals statements, and could be called objectives, outcomes, but basically it's that broad statement that says what students are supposed to be able to do. In this case, this example says understand literature. You notice it's a 1. That's part of the code. So this is all about creating a code to link everything together. And how we help our faculty with this is by saying to get from level 1 to 1.1, which will more clearly delineate what we mean by understand. You can think of the word by. So if you can say students will understand by demonstrating accurate, critical, analytic reading of literature, then you've gotten to the GLO level, the general learning outcome level. So now the code is 1 and 1.1. And to get from the GLO level, which could be somewhat measurable, but it's really not usable in terms of writing an item, you could write all kinds of items from the domain to match this. But to be more specific, excuse me, we go to the the specific learning outcome statement level, and notice the little s. Sorry, let me get a sip of something here. Okay, so to get to this specific learning outcome level, you have to make statements that would answer, they would be able to do the 1.1 level by identifying, recognizing, identifying, determining, and we will infer from this level 1.1.1, 1.1.2, 1.1.3, 1.1.4. If they can achieve these outcomes, we will infer that they can do this outcome, and that will map up to the goal. So the whole model is based on getting information at this level that we can map up. Notice the little s, that's to discriminate from the general big SLO. Oh, there at the bottom, that's the name of the book down there, Connecting the Dots, Developing Student Learning Outcomes and Outcome-Based Assessments. So we were going through 4 or 5 years of this program, and it was labor intensive for our faculty that were a part of the program. And of course the purpose was to make it across the campus, which we're still working on. But then we discovered ExamSoft this last year, and we've used it for 2 semesters, and it allows us to record on the left hand side where the arrow is, the goal level, the GLO level, and the little SLO levels. So we have all of our outcome statements that can be recorded within the program. The program assigns a reference number to each statement if you need it. But also we can find out at a glance how many questions there are being used to measure at each of the levels. And there's also an accumulative total on the right side. So now we have our outcomes listed somewhere. And our folks do this sometimes in Word, sometimes in our LMS programs, sometimes in other programs. But they can't ever really have a good connection with it to the item. And this is the key, is to have a test item that directly links to this SLO statement. This example item down here could be constructed response, it could be selected response. In this case it is. It's a multiple choice question, or multiple choice item. And the results from this will be directly linked to the SLO. So here's how we do that. It used to be, again, labor intensive, and our program runs for 4 semesters. Folks actually get a grant to participate, and they have to be, there's a criterion for them that they have to meet, and they have to submit, respond to a proposal. But once they're in the program, they earnestly try to do all of these procedures, and it's always been difficult when it came to really getting data that they can make instructional decisions on that makes sense in terms of outcomes. So with ExamSoft, we find we can tag, well, first we can enter our test question here, our test item here. Then we can tag that to any of our outcomes, and here they are again, 1, 1.1, 1.1.1, etc. So by clicking on any of these green buttons, it will put the outcomes over on this side. If we need to delete something, we can click the red button. The key is now we have the connection. Now we are connected to this item. We are linked to an SLO. Structurally, this is what this looks like. And we talked about the goal level, and then we developed the GLO level or the SLO level. And the final step then is to develop items. In this case, these 4 items numbered 1 through 4 are used to measure the specific outcome statement. And some of our folks say, you know, I really like the items I'm using. They're in the back of the book, but all this makes sense for linking it and being able to get a measurement of the outcome. And we just said, well, if you like those items, then you can convert those into the specific outcome statements. So it can work nicely both ways for the writing the outcomes. But once the items have been identified, then to calculate an attainment value, an outcome attainment value, we take the percentage correct for each of the items, in this case the 4, average it up, and come out with 81. So we would say that 81% of this particular outcome has been attained. And you can see on the left-hand side the 3 green items, the purple ones, the different amounts. So when we average all of these together, we would have to use a weighted average. And averaging the 3 outcomes, specific outcomes that measure this general outcome, will give us an attainment value of 81. 81% of this general outcome was attained. And there are typically 2 to 4 general outcomes for every goal, and there are typically 2 to 4 or 6, sometimes as many as 10 specific outcomes. Then if you average these 2 values together, you get an average value for the goal, the large statement that started out being, it's not measurable, so we don't have a number for it, but now we do. So this particular goal 1 is what we would probably put on the report we do to the president each year. For the last couple years, that's all that we needed to report there. There was enough information to satisfy that level. For, say, program managers, for chairs, for deans, our folks report this level. But there's really never any item that specifically has been linked here. It all comes from back here. So if we are asked, so why should I believe that this outcome attainment value is valid? And we say, well, it links back to these specific statements, and it goes all the way back to a test item. And nothing else that is typically associated with grades like extra credit, etc., is in this measure. And usually that ends that conversation. So we have a nice reporting level, and this is where the faculty are interested, the specific outcome level. This is the grassroots level where they will be making the decisions for fixing items, changing items, designing their courses, reworking outcome statements, and determining what instructional models they might want to use. So sometimes interpreting that attainment value is asked, and this is the best way to think of it, how full is the glass? If it were completely full, it would be 100%. In this case, it's 75% full, so the outcome attainment is 0.75. And we say that the class as a whole attained 75% of the outcome. Not that 75% of the individuals attained the outcome. So this is a class measure. We've been wanting for several years to get down to the individual level, and until ExamSoft came along, we couldn't do that because that was just not doable. We didn't have any type of program that would do that for us. Now this is how we've been recording the information in a nice little table. Sometimes we get the data in, and so my department has to make this report. But it's a nice way for folks to look back and see exactly which items are contributing to what outcome, and then you can use the other levels to make this bottom table, all centered around the same function of the item percentage contributing to the first number that we get, and then it gets put down into tables that are at higher levels. So this is all nice, but it's also difficult in terms of getting this information and designing somewhere for the folks in all these different courses to get their information onto something that represents a report. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, but I also want to show you how we can use this same concept applied to a class activity. In this case, this activity here, it's an experiential activity, was provided so the participants could achieve these outcomes. That was a purpose for it. And this is how they did. Here you can see that for SLO 1.2.3, the outcome attainment was 69. For 1.3.2, 91. They did pretty well on that. 2.1.2 must have been either difficult items or difficult outcome, or something happened in the instruction, but it may just be that it's a hard subject, a hard topic, so that may be quite reasonable. But up here, notice as you look down the percentage corrects, item number 4, that's a problem item. We would call that a flawed item because less than 50% of the students got it correct. It could be flawed because item writing rules weren't followed. That's typically why. But we would only know exactly how to look at that from also looking at the item analysis, which we'll talk about shortly. If you're using rubric scores because you're giving some type of performance test or a written exam, or even building a project where you need a rubric, and we assume it would probably be, if it's a big project, it'll be an analytic type rubric, which would have a scale of like maybe 1 to 4. In this case, here are your outcomes. There's 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and this is at the GLO level because typically it's difficult to get to this specific level with those rubrics and have so many rows that with the specific level outcomes you'd have many, many rows. So it usually ends up being GLOs. But if it's a 4-point scale, and the average for the class for clarity in this case was 2.65, you could take 2.65 into 4 and you would have an attainment value of 0.66. So yes, you can get an outcome attainment value from a rubric scoring. Now this is what ExamSoft provides, and this is what changed the world for us, was that the instructor can get a report like this that immediately shows the class average, the lowest score, the highest score, a reliability coefficient, a histogram for the percent corrects, and can see the range at the GLO, at the goal level for this particular outcome, the range of scores, and at the specific learning outcome levels. And it's a quick glance to make a decision about how are things going. And this is the lowest score, the highest, and this is the class average. Now, the question becomes, so how does this help the student? The student can get this report. And let's look over here because you can see there's the goal. There's our big goal. I keep losing my mouse here. There we go. The GLO 1.1 level and 1.1.1, 1.1.2, 0.3, etc. In this case, there happen to be 10 specific outcomes. And again, at a glance, the student can see his score, her score, my score, the average score, and the range of where that student is, because the black dots represent where the student is across the range of scores that he could have gotten. The blue shows the average. But to make a decision, the student always appreciates that they can glance over here and say, oh, okay, I need improvement on this one because here I am below this average. If I'm doing well, did great there. Now I have an indicator that I'm doing well. And if it was somewhere in the middle, there would be a yellow indicator. So again, at a glance, this provides the student with something specific. And remember, they probably have a copy of all the student learning outcomes because once they're written, they should be shared, and that we really promote that with our program. And the instructor can also use this page to meet with the student and have a conversation. Now, we talked about needing to validate the items before. Probably many of you use this. A lot of the faculty on our campus use this who aren't in the program, but we really do recommend it highly. And you can see that in case you haven't used one of these before, this is just the proportion or the percentage of students that got the item 1 correct. And this was the correct answer. This is the key response. The important thing we stress to them is, first of all, if you get an item that's below 50%, there's a reason for it, like item number 2. And you have to go back and figure that out. It may be because it snowed that day. We have erratic weather here in North Texas. Or maybe the book said something, you said something else. But at any rate, there's always a reason. And you will get values that don't make sense sometimes, like this one. But there's always a reason. Here's what we'd like to see then, is that this item with 61% had 35% of the lowest group of scoring students, the group that scored the lowest, 35% chose that item, that option. 86% of the highest scoring students chose it. This is an indication that the students that should have missed it did, and the students that should have gotten it correct did. If you subtract 35 from 86, you get 51. That's an index, and it's recommended that typically it run between 30 and 60, 0.30 to 0.60. And it gives you an idea then that this item is discriminating pretty well between those two types of students that should get it and not get it. Now, the point by serial is also something that some of our folks like to use. Our LMS program provides some of this, but it's really difficult to dig it out of the reports it produces. Bubble sheets work actually better if you tell the scanner to give you this information. So the point by serial, just for now for conversation, just if it says minus, that means that this selection of the item by the students is reversed. More lows choose it than highs, and that's what you want. The point here is you need to validate your items in order to make a statement that the students that the attainment value of the students for that particular student learning outcome can have credibility. And here's how ExamSoft does it. And everybody's happy with this because they only had to look one place. It gives the difficulty of the item, the difficulty value, the percentage correct, upper and lower response groups, discrimination index, point by serial, and of course some of the descriptive information across the top, and information for option A, option B, and option C. And for this particular item, we can see 64% of the students chose it, 73% in the upper group, 38% of the lower group, etc., etc. And this were the number of students that chose each of the options, option A, option B, option C. So we have all the information on each option as well as the overall answer correct. We had happy campers when we showed them. In the longitudinal report, we can look at the total number of assessments that were given and look at the goal, the GLO, and the little SLOs in relation to all of the assessments that were given. And we can look at how many items there were at each of those levels and the percentage, which converts right away to our outcome attainment value for each of the goals, the GLOs, and the SLOs. And uniquely, we can look at how student 1 did across those 4 exams, or however many there were, and how they did on each of the levels. We haven't done a lot with that yet, but we're working on it because there are implications for this. And I'll stay there a minute. you begin to think with this type of information coming back at the student level, words like paced learning, individualized instruction, and those type terms begin to have some meaning. Now, we said that we could also map up from the course level, and this is what this demonstrates. Here are the goals for Course 1, Course 2, and Course 3. These have been matched or mapped or linked to the program goals 1, 2, 4, 3, and 5. They're not always represented, but in this case, Course 5, Goal 5 links to Program Goal 5, 4 to 3, 3 and 4. To get a program goal outcome attainment value, then, we pick those values, average them up, and say that for Program Goal 2, whatever that is, it has 81% attainment value based on these 3 courses. The trick is, do the words in the program goal match the words in the goals from the course? So at this point, items weren't given to get these values at the program level. They're given way back at the course level. But if the statements link well enough in terms of semantics and syntax, then it's reasonable to say that this attainment value could be used to report at the program goal. I kid some of the IR and E folks sometimes that, if we got these, you wouldn't need all those different types of external measures to report to SACS or report to your accreditation. Okay, another feature is actually getting the values at that program level. So now we don't have to go through any of those, that last page of steps, because here they are. Here's Goal 1 for a course, Goal 2 for a course, Goal 3 for a course. Up here's 1, 2, and 3, and they average up to 86.5 for Program Goal 1. It's all done for us. Here again, it even takes it to the student level. How did they do across all the assessments, and how does their achievement match up to a program goal? And this is something that we still do and ask our faculty to do, is tell us what was your criterion, what was your target for attainment. Because remember, all those statements, those standards from the accreditation agencies did ask, are you getting not only an attainment value, but are you using it to make a difference? So if the attainment was 81 and the criterion was 80, we could say they achieved a +1. In this case, maybe the criterion was, maybe they got a little too ambitious there, or this needs some work. And at least we have a measure that can be applied at the course level for instructional improvement and course design. And again, this was how we would look at the GLO level. And this is how it would look at the goal level. So our IR and E folks for accreditation probably are going to be reporting at this level. This is what a statement would look like using the attainment at the course level. You could say something like this, and SACS likes these statements. I'm sure all accreditors do. You could talk about meeting criteria. You could talk about criterion at general outcome level and goal outcome level. In our report, fifth-year report, we focused on the goal level, but we also showed how you get there, and that was appreciated. You can also talk about a change in the percentage at an outcome level, a percentage of attainment, or how much you think you might be able to increase or want to increase. And for reporting attainment at the program level, you could talk about the criterion, how many of the goals were met, and You could talk about attainment of certain goals and how much that attainment increased. You could look at particular improvement goals and say which criteria or which goal you want to increase the attainment rate on. And that brings us to Q&A. So Carter, I guess this is back to you to tell us, what I need to do with this.
Carter?
Carter, are you there? Yes.
Sorry, I was having some trouble with mute there.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm done, and we're ready for Q&A.
Sure. Yeah, we do indeed have some questions here. We also have a little bit of praise. This one person in particular said, great presentation. He's sorry he missed the beginning, and will it be available? I also had a couple of other people ask questions of a similar nature, asking if the presentation will be available. It will. I'm sending out a video of this recording expected in your inbox within the next 48 hours or so. The rest of the questions here look like they're going to have to go for Ron. So the first one that we'll start with is who and what determines the passing score benchmark for a specific goal or general goal?
That is entirely up to the instructor, and if they're working with some type of program level, then that'd be entirely up to the folks that are reporting to whatever accreditation agency they need to report to. So it's not any different than saying that you need, of the 400 points in the course, you need 300 to pass.
All right. What about, let's see, another question. I'm trying to kind of lump the questions together by topic. Okay, let's go straight into point by serial then. What is an acceptable point by serial for item discrimination?
Well, again, it's pretty close to what the discrimination index is, which is around, in the literature, they'll tell you somewhere between a 0.30 and a 0.60. But as you know, well, I won't flip back to that table, but when you have items where most of the students get it correct, or items where most of the students miss it, that discrimination index and the point by serial will jump around. And typically they'll drop, and therefore I always tell our folks, look at the percentage on the right side of which of the lowest versus the highest scoring students, how did they do, and make decisions from there. So it floats. In other words, it's somewhat, to me, unreliable.
Okay. Okay. How different is the KR20 from the point by serial?
Well, the KR20 does a let me see, the 21 was the old way to do it, and then they came up with the 20 because it does all the permutations across all the items. And so it's a correlation coefficient, but the point by serial is looking at the particular response to an item compared to the total scores. So they can be related, but they're not the same thing.
All right. Okay, another one, and actually this one may require you to go back to that point by serial chart that you had up. Could you please just review that slide again? Just sort of give us a tour of what's happening on the point by serial thing there. Yeah, I think you missed it. There it is.
Sounds like the questions are more technical stuff here. Okay, well, let's look. Go ahead. Is there another question on this?
No,
should I just explain this?
It just asked if you would please review the point by serial again and the item validation.
Okay. let's look at two things here. Notice the percentage correct, the proportion correct is in the middle, and so you're going to have these values, discrimination and point by serials, both pretty close. When you get down here to where a lot of students have gotten the item correct, these are going to typically move around. The point by serial will be a little more stable, but the discrimination index is going to move down. If this were 90% of the students getting it correct, or 98%, this is probably going to drop down to around, if I can get my mouse back, drop down to around probably like this, 18. Here's where hardly anyone got it correct, and the reason is you don't have many numbers to subtract from here. But notice the point by serial also is out of range. So these are just two indicators of a poor item. These two indicators of a good item. And these are a little bit hard to interpret because they vary so much, especially when if this was 90. 80 is still a pretty good range. So, you know, you can say, yeah, these are good indicators. But these indicators are out of range, and all you can say, this is a problem item. And I also highlighted these in blue, one of the options, because typically, always, you know, the fourth option is the one that's hardest to write. I've asked many faculty members, say, yeah, I get the absolutely positively correct one, then I get the next most plausible and the next most plausible, and when I try to come up with another plausible, it's hard. And the literature for going back 80 years and current literature all says that you only need 3 options. So I have all those references if needed, but if you always get this low percentage, it's not contributing anything statistically. And that is also going to have an effect then on your point by serial. So another practical effect of this is if you don't need to write the 4th option, then you could add more items to the test, which increases reliability because you have the same amount of time, but they're not having to mess with that option that the students already have figured out is not a very good choice because hardly anyone chose it. And these are actual numbers, by the way, from a I forget how many items there were, but over 2,000 students took this test. It was one I did a while back, and obviously I didn't do a very good job on this item, but you have to look at all those things when you start interpreting these 2 columns. Does that help? We could talk more about. Huh?
For me, it does. I'm sure if they have any more questions, they'll ask. Next question is, what sort of investment and faculty involvement was required for you to start using this 3-tier system? How much training did your faculty go through?
The new faculty that sign up for the program, and they do get grant money to participate, and they have a 4-semester obligation. But the first thing we hit in what we call our boot camp is how to write the outcome statements in the 3-level model. And after about a 6-hour period, some of them leave with their outcome statements for their course done. And we've had comments after that one of the most valuable, the hardest thing to do was writing the outcomes. You know, they didn't say the hardest thing was writing the items, so the hardest thing was getting the outcome attainment. So the hardest thing really was getting really good outcome statements, but the reward was that they realized in many cases, you know, we have way too many outcomes that we're trying to measure on our students. And I used to talk with the chemistry folks and say, that big fat book there, do you actually have students read it? And they said, well, no. I said, well, what do you use of it? Well, we use certain things. And I said, so what do the students do? Because I have to buy the book. They said, well, they can use it as a reference. But now they say, okay, we pulled out of there the specific learning outcomes that we need, and we know we can cover that in a year, and that's what they appreciate about the outcomes. They also appreciate that they sleep better at night because they know exactly what they're going to be covering, and the students also know, and that makes a nice communication link.
Very nice. I'm trying to figure out how to actually phrase this. What kind of courses are included in NextGen, and did you have to convince faculty to actually join?
The first year, we did. That was 7 years ago when we first started the QEP. It was hard to get anybody to sign up, so we found about 6 or 8 people wanted to, and then the SACS told us that's too ambitious. Start with 4 courses. And then the next year, we sent out a proposal, and it grew to 8. Some always drop out. There's always attrition. And then it grew to 12, and then it grew to 18, and then it grew to over 20. But there's always attrition. And after the first 2 years, we began to offer less. It started out with $12,000 grant. But remember, this is a QEP. This is serious stuff. And when the QEP said, it said, we're going to do outcome-based assessment stuff. And so we had to make sure we could eventually report that. And then as more joined, more sent in proposals, and we won't accept all the proposals. There has to be a good reason why they want to redesign their course and get into this much work. Then we dropped the amount to, I think it's down to $6,000 now for the 4 semesters and dropping. And some of the folks now are saying, we don't care about the money. So we made progress that way, but yes, it was a rough start.
Very nice. All right, can you please speak to item validation that are select all that apply questions? What would happen then?
Well, there are actually in my book I have several pages on the rules, the guidelines for writing, and Haladina and all those folks that have written for years on it have certain guidelines. One of the guidelines is don't use all of the above or none of the above. What did I say?
What he's asking about, say instead of a multiple choice question, you have a question that asks you to select which of the following fit a certain category. So select all that apply. It's different than all of the above.
You said all of the above or none of the above, didn't you?
No. No, all that apply.
Oh, all that apply. That works for a lot of areas like speech and nursing and places where there is a lot to be tested. That can help, but it's not a recommended, in the literature, it's not a highly recommended way to get a good measure. And you can look at some of the, just go to the books by Haladina and Statman and folks like that, and Downing, and you'll find them critiquing them, and they typically recommend the standard multiple choice item as one of the best ways to do the selected response. Sorry I can't give you some absolute positive answers and stats on that, but if you have to use it, it's okay. If you can write enough with other types of items, they'll give you a little bit better information.
Very cool. This next question is ExamSoft specific, sort of. Who manages ExamSoft at your school?
Well, we have, in fact, the person who manages is sitting next to me here. It's my research assistant, graduate research assistant. And we, of course, had to learn the program, and he was the one that really took the bull by the horns and got it down. But ExamSoft always had somebody available. I mean, we just had to pick up the phone or send an email, and ExamSoft folks came out. So the implementation does need some guidance, like all new programs, but it's relatively intuitive once you get into it. And I don't know, I'm going to ask Brett here, you want to have any comment on?
Well, okay, so the way it works right now is, hi, I'm Brett Kellerstedt. I'm Ron's assistant, and I'm also the ExamSoft administrator here at the UNT Denton campus. And I work very closely with our account administrator, Beverly Mindel. Like I talk to her on Skype or via email almost every other day, and she comes up here very regularly to help implement tests and stuff like that. And that's just for a fairly initial implementation, where we've only got like 5 or 6 courses right now in ExamSoft. My role, all I do is I run the portal. I make sure everybody's got their administrative rights working and stuff like that, and make sure that they've got everything built, and then I help them give their tests and make sure everything's working right.
Very cool. Okay. Last question that I'm showing is, can you share a list of your references?
References for?
I would imagine this came whenever you were speaking about others who had done research on items. That's whenever this question popped up. So I'm assuming that this person would just like those.
Probably, yeah, I mentioned references in that you don't need but 3 options. Yes, I'll be happy to.
Sure.
Should I send that to you, Carter, and you get it out, or?
Yes, or I believe on the very last slide in this presentation, your email address was listed, correct?
Yeah, just email me, and I'll be happy to send that. There's a whole page on it in my book, and also information on how to analyze an item. There's a diagram in there, so there's plenty of evidence that I always tell our faculty, if anybody wants to argue with you about it, stick to your guns. We've got plenty of evidence to show that the 3 options is recommended in the measurement field.